Ethan Cole tore the letter in half, then in half again, and let the wind rip the pieces across 4,000 acres of mountain grass. It didn't matter. He already knew every word by heart. His dead brother's widow was coming a banker's daughter, who'd never sat a horse, never mended a fence, never buried a man she loved in high country ground. And she owned a quarter of everything he'd bled for. She wasn't coming to grieve. She was coming to count. And Ethan Cole would sooner burn the whole ranch down than let a city stranger tell him what his life was worth. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this one turns out. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The wind carried the last scrap of paper somewhere out past the north fence, and Ethan Cole watched it go without moving a muscle. "You gonna go after it?" Silas asked. "No." Might have been important. It was a threat dressed up in a lady's handwriting. Ethan pulled his hat lower against the summer sun. "It ain't going anywhere just 'cause I let it fly off." Silas said nothing. 40 years he'd worked this land long before Ethan was born, back when the boy's father was carving the first road up the mountain with his bare hands and a borrowed mule. Silas had a way of standing quiet that pressed harder than any argument. He was doing it now. "Go on," Ethan said. "Say it. She owns a quarter, Ethan. That's the law and the will both. You can burn every letter she sends. Don't change what's written down in Denver." "Daniel's dead 6 months." Ethan's jaw worked. 6 months. And she waits till the grass is high and the cattle are fat and there's something worth taking before she remembers she's got a claim. That tell you anything about the woman? Tells me she waited for spring roundup numbers is all. Any banker's daughter would. That's exactly my point. Ethan turned and walked toward the barn, and Silas fell in beside him, the way he'd been falling in beside Cole men for 4 decades. The dust rose around their boots, and neither one paid it any mind. "You never even met her," Silas said. "I met her at the funeral." "You stood across a hole in the ground from her for 20 minutes and never said a word. That ain't meeting somebody." "I said all I needed to say." "You said nothing." "Sometimes that's a whole sentence, Silas." The old man let out a breath through his nose. "Your brother loved that woman." Ethan stopped walking. For a moment the only sound was a horse stamping in the corral and a jay screaming from the ridge. Ethan's shoulders had gone rigid, and the hand that hung at his side had curled slow into a fist without his say-so. "Don't," he said. "Quiet. Don't you use his name to make her welcome here. I'm using his name 'cause somebody's got to. You act like she stole him. She married him, in a church, with his family looking on, or with the family that bothered to come." That landed. Ethan felt it land. He'd stayed home from his own brother's wedding, sent a note and a heifer and a reason that had sounded solid 4 years ago and sounded like nothing at all now that Daniel was in the ground. "When's she getting here?" Ethan said. It wasn't a question. He'd read that much before the letter went to pieces. Letter said Thursday. Today's Thursday. I know it. Ethan swore under his breath and looked up the long road that climbed toward the ranch gate, as if he could make her unhappen by staring at the empty place where she wasn't yet. "How long's she mean to stay?" Silas hesitated. That hesitation told Ethan everything before the words did. "A week," Silas said. She wrote it plain. 1 week to go through the books, the contracts, the stock, the land. She calls it an audit. An audit. Ethan said the word like it tasted of rot. "This is a ranch, Silas, not a bank. You don't audit dirt and cattle. You work it. You bleed for it. You bury people in it." His voice cracked on the last of it, and he hated the crack more than he hated her. "You don't count it." She might just look and go. Women like that don't look and go. They look and take. Silas tipped his hat back and squinted at him, and there was something almost like pity in the old man's face, which was worse than anger would have been. "You don't know a single thing about that woman," Silas said. "And you already decided the whole story of her. That's your daddy in you. God rest him, he'd have done the same. My daddy built this. Your daddy near lost it twice 'cause he wouldn't listen to a soul." Silas turned and started for the tack room. "I love that man, but I ain't gonna pretend the stubborn skipped a generation. It didn't. It got worse." Ethan stood alone in the yard and let the accusations sit on him like the heat. He rode to town that afternoon because he'd told himself he needed nails and a new latch for the smokehouse, and because if he stayed on the ranch, he'd have gone crazy waiting for a wagon that might not come till dusk. Miller's General Store had been the beating heart of the valley since before the war, and the moment Ethan's boots hit the boards, the talk that had been rolling behind the counter dropped off to nothing. "Ethan?" Miller nodded at him. "Been a spell." "Miller." Ethan tipped his hat, set his list down. "Need what's on there, and a new latch heavy iron." But he'd already caught the two women by the dry goods, Mrs. Pruitt and the widow Aldridge, leaning close, and he'd caught the shape of the word they'd been passing back and forth before he came in. He knew the shape of that word. It was his own name, and beside it another. "Go on and say it to my face," Ethan said, not turning around. "Whatever it is." Mrs. Pruitt straightened up like a schoolmarm caught passing notes. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Mr. Cole." "You know exactly what I mean, ma'am. You've been chewing on my business since the door opened." "Well," Mrs. Pruitt's mouth pinched. "Since you ask, the whole town knows she's coming. That Whitmore woman, come up from Kansas City to pick over your poor brother's estate like a crow on a fence post." "That's so. My cousin banks where her father banks," the widow Aldridge put in, eager, leaning across a barrel of pickles. "Says she's got ice in her veins where blood ought to be. Says she foreclosed on her own uncle, her own kin, Mr. Cole. Sent the sheriff to a man who dandled her on his knee. They call her the Ledger up there," Mrs. Pruitt said, dropping her voice like the word itself might charge her interest. "On account of she reads a man like a column of figures, adds him up. And if the numbers don't please her," she snapped her fingers, "out he goes." Ethan had come in, half hating the woman. He'd rehearsed that hate all the way down the mountain, polished it, made it comfortable. And these two were handing it back to him, gift-wrapped, and something in him, something ornery, and cold to the bone, recoiled from it. "That's a lot of knowing," he said slowly, "for two ladies who never once met her." Mrs. Pruitt blinked. "I beg your pardon." "You heard from a cousin who heard from a teller." Ethan picked up the latch Miller had set out, tested its weight in his palm. "That's the whole valley, though, ain't it? We don't meet folks. We hear about 'em. And by the time they ride in, we already got the noose measured to the neck." "Well, I never—" "No, ma'am. I don't reckon you have." He set 2 coins on the counter hard. "You never met my brother's wife, and neither did I hardly. But he did. And he wasn't a stupid man. He was the smartest of the two of us by a country mile, and he loved her enough to leave this mountain for her. So before we all sharpen our knives, maybe we ought to ask why a smart man would do a fool thing like that." The store had gone dead silent. Miller was staring at him. Ethan was a little surprised at himself, if he was honest. He'd walked in meaning to agree with them. "Miller," he said, gathering his goods. "Latch and the rest. Put it on my book." "You bet, Ethan." He was at the door when Mrs. Pruitt got her breath back. "You defend her now?" she called after him, tart. "You wait, Mr. Cole. You'll be singing a different tune come Sunday. Mark me. That woman will strip your ranch to the bone and never blink." Ethan stopped in the doorway. He didn't turn. "Maybe she will," he said. "But I'll be the one who finds it out. Not you and not your cousin's teller. Good day, ladies." He was 3 miles up the mountain road before he understood the strange thing that had happened to him in that store. He'd defended a woman he'd every intention of throwing off his land. And he understood riding through the long gold light with the pines coming close on both sides that he hadn't been defending her at all. He'd been defending Daniel. The wagon was already at the gate when he came over the last rise. Ethan reined up hard. His horse tossed its head. She was standing beside the wagon, not sitting in it, and even from 100 yards, he could tell she wasn't what he'd braced for. He'd built her tall and sharp in his mind, all angles and expensive cloth. The woman at his gate wore gray traveling clothes gone pale with dust, and she stood the way a person stands who is used to waiting and doesn't mind it. Hands folded chin level, a leather ledger tucked under one arm, the way another woman might hold a Bible. He walked his horse down slow. She watched him come the whole way. Didn't wave, didn't smile, didn't do any of the softening things a woman does when she wants a hard man to like her. Just watched, and by the time he'd stopped 10 feet off, he had the deeply unwelcome feeling that he'd been the one understudy the whole ride down. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Whitmore, yes." Something flickered at that. "You remembered I took my name back." "I remember most things, ma'am." "So do I." She stepped forward. "Which is why I know you didn't ride out to greet me. You rode in behind me. You've been to town." Ethan swung down off his horse, taking his time letting the reins fall. "Long trip up. You could have written the date plainer." "I wrote Thursday. It's Thursday." She glanced past him up the road he'd come down. "The town warned you about me. I imagine they told you I foreclosed on my uncle." Ethan didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I did," she said, simple, as noting the weather. He'd mortgaged a house he didn't own twice to 2 banks and told his sister, my mother, it was a sound investment. When it came apart, someone was going to lose everything. I made sure it wasn't the widows and the shopkeepers who'd trusted him. She adjusted the ledger under her arm. "People find it easier to hate the person holding the numbers than the person who lied about them. It's an old habit. I don't take it personally anymore." She'd said the whole thing in the flat, even voice of a woman reading a receipt aloud, and Ethan found he couldn't quite pull his gaze off her. "You always talk like that?" he asked. "Like what?" "Like everything's a sum." "Everything is a sum, Mr. Cole." She met his eyes. "Most people just don't like to see the total." Silas had come out onto the porch. The ranch hands had drifted in from the near paddock, 3 of them hats in hands, staring at the city woman like she was a wolf that had walked up to the fire and sat down. Ethan felt the whole weight of the place settle onto his shoulders. His men. His brother's grave up on the ridge. His father's road under her wagon wheels. "You've come a long way for nothing," he said. "I'll put you up tonight on account of the hour and Christian decency. In the morning, I'll have Silas drive you back down to the stage. You'll get your quarter. I'll buy you out fair price, whatever a Denver man says it's worth. You don't need to open any books to know I'll pay honest. Everybody in this valley'll tell you a Cole pays honest." Claire Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "They told me that too. That's the part that worries me." "Beg pardon. An honest man who won't look at his own books is more dangerous than a dishonest one who does." She said it gently. That was the worst part, she said it gently. The dishonest man at least knows where the money's going. "Mr. Cole, you offered to pay me a fair price for my quarter share not 1 minute after we met. Do you know what a fair price is?" "I know what the land's worth." "Do you?" "What did the ranch clear last year net? After feed, after wages, after the notes your father carried, and the notes your brother carried after him?" Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. "You don't know," she said, not cruel. Almost, and this was unbearable, almost kind. "You know what it made. You have no idea what it cost. And a man who knows what a thing makes, but not what it costs Mr. Cole, is a man who is losing money every single day. He calls this place a ranch." The words dropped into the yard and lay there. Behind him, one of the hands sucked a breath through his teeth. Silas didn't move. Ethan felt heat climb his neck that had nothing at all to do with the sun. And then, because he didn't know what else to do with a thing that had hit him that squarely, he laughed. It came out short and hard, and not at all like real laughing. "Losing money," he said. "That's rich. That's real rich, ma'am. This ranch fed my daddy, fed me, fed my brother, fed your husband. The money that put you in that fine gray dress came off the back of these very cattle, and you stand at my gate and tell me I'm losing money." "Yes." "On what proof? On the fact that you don't know your net." She hadn't raised her voice a hair. "That's all the proof I need to begin. I'll find the rest inside." She looked toward the house. "Which is the office? You ain't going in my office. It's a quarter mine." "The quarter don't come with a key, ma'am. Then I'll audit from memory and from the county records and from every man in that town who ever sold you feed at a markup." She stepped closer, and her voice dropped, and for the first time something moved behind the flat calm of her. Not softness exactly, but heat banked low. "You think I want to be here? You think I enjoy riding 3 days up a mountain to a family that couldn't be bothered to come to my wedding? To sit at the table of a man who stood across his own brother's grave and looked at me like I'd dug the hole myself?" Ethan went still. "I loved him," she said. "You didn't come. You didn't write for 4 years. And then he died, and I sat in that church next to an empty pew where his family should have been, and I decided I was done being the crow, done being the ledger, done being the ice woman that towns invent, so they don't have to look at their own arithmetic. I was going to sell you my quarter sight unseen and never think of this mountain again." She stopped, steadied herself with a visible effort, and it was the effort that undid Ethan more than the words. "And then I looked at the last 3 letters your brother ever wrote me, and in every one of them he was worried about money. He didn't tell you. He was too proud, Coles are, I've noticed. But he told me. He wrote it down. And a man who is worried about money on a ranch that's supposedly thriving is a man whose books are lying to him." The yard had gone graveyard quiet. "So no Mr. Cole," Claire finished. "I'm not leaving in the morning. I'm going to open those books. Because if your brother was right, if there's a leak in this place big enough that a dying man could feel it in the dark, then whatever it is, it didn't kill him. But it broke his last months in half, and I would like to know what did that." Her voice finally cracked one small fracture running clean through the ice. "That's my price. Not the quarter, not the money. I want to know what I couldn't fix in time, and then I'll go." Moy. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Ethan looked at this woman standing dust-covered at his gate with a dead man's worries clutched to her chest, and every ugly thing the town had handed him turned to ash in his mouth. "Daniel wrote you," he said. "Rough. About money. 3 letters. I have them in the wagon. He never said a word to me." "No?" Her eyes softened, and it nearly killed him. "I don't think he could. You were the older brother, the strong one. He didn't want to be the one who told you the ground was moving." She hesitated. "That's the thing about pride, Mr. Cole. It's very expensive. And on this ranch, I think somebody's been paying the bill for a long time, and it wasn't you." Silas came down off of the porch, slow. He stopped beside Ethan and looked at the woman a good while, and then he did a thing Ethan had never once seen him do for a stranger. He took off his hat. "Ma'am," Silas said, "I knew your husband since he was knee-high, taught him to rope. He was worried about money, you say?" "Yes, Silas." She knew his name. She'd read it somewhere in some book, and Ethan understood in a cold rush that she'd studied all of them before she ever left Kansas City. Feed prices mostly. He kept saying the numbers didn't sit right and no one would let him near the ledgers to check. Silas's weathered face did something complicated. "No one," he repeated. "That's what he wrote." The old foreman turned and looked at Ethan. And there it was again, that thing in his eyes that was worse than blame. "Ethan," Silas said quietly, "you want to tell her, or should I?" Ethan felt the ground shift under his own boots. "Tell her what?" he said. "That your brother asked to see the books twice, and both times somebody told him they were fine and he needn't trouble himself." Silas held Ethan's gaze without flinching. "I was there for the second one, and it wasn't you doing the telling, but you were in the room, and you let it stand." The memory came up out of Ethan like cold water from a deep well. Daniel at the kitchen table one winter night saying, "Let me just have a look, Ethan. I've a head for figures." And Ethan tired, grieving their father, still saying the books are handled. Danny, get some rest. Handled. He'd said it 100 times. Handled. He'd never once asked by whom. He hadn't thought of that night in 2 years. Now he couldn't think of anything else. Claire watched the color leave his face, and being who she was, understood most of it at a glance. "You didn't know," she said. Not a question. A verdict handed down gently. "You still don't know. Who keeps your books, Mr. Cole?" Ethan's mouth was dry. "Same as always," he said. Same as my daddy used. Old family. Harmon does the banking end down in town. And the day-to-day's kept by—" He stopped. "By," Claire prompted. And Ethan Cole realized, standing in his own front yard on a hot summer evening, with the light going long and gold across 4,000 acres, that he did not have a clean answer to the simplest question about his own life. He knew every fence line. He knew every cow by the notch in her ear. He knew where his brother was buried and how deep and what the preacher had said over him. He did not know who counted his money. "I'll show you the office," he heard himself say. Silas's head came up. "Ethan," the old man started. "I'll show her the office, Silas." Ethan's voice had gone strange and quiet, like a man speaking from the far side of a locked door. He pulled his hat off, turned it once in his hands, and looked at the ledger clutched under Claire Whitmore's arm, as if it were a loaded gun somebody had just set on the table. 1 week. She wanted a week. She can have it. "You sure about this?" Silas asked low. "No," Ethan said. "But my brother wrote 3 letters he was too proud to send to me, and a stranger's the only one who read 'em. I reckon I've been sure about the wrong things long enough." He put his hat back on and looked at the woman at his gate. "You can bring your books inside, ma'am. Supper's at 6. It ain't fancy. And in the morning—" His jaw tightened. "In the morning you show me exactly what my brother saw. All of it. Whatever it costs." Claire Whitmore studied him for a long moment. And then, for the first time since the wagon had stopped, the flat armored calm of her face gave way just a little to something Ethan hadn't expected and couldn't name. It looked a great deal like grief, and underneath the grief, surprise. As if she'd ridden 3 days up a mountain fully braced to fight a stubborn fool for a week, and had just watched him lay his weapon down at the gate. "That's a braver thing than most men would do," she said quietly. "It ain't brave." Ethan turned toward the house so she wouldn't see his face. "It's just late." He walked up the steps and held the door, and after a moment he heard her boots on the boards behind him, and Silas telling the hands to see to her horses, and the whole ordinary machinery of the ranch grinding back into motion around a thing that had just quietly changed forever. Inside, he lit the lamp in the office his father had built, and his brother had never been allowed to enter. The books sat on the shelf where they always sat, a long row of leather spines gone soft at the corners, the family's whole life written down in another man's hand. Claire set her own ledger on the desk. She didn't reach for the shelf yet. She looked at the row of books the way a doctor looks at a patient who's been sick a long while, and called it health. "Mr. Cole," she said, "before I open a single one of these, I want you to hear something so it's plain between us. Say it. Whatever I find in here—" She rested her fingers on the desk. "It's going to be worse than you think. It always is. Men don't lie to auditors half so well as they lie to themselves, and you've had years of practice." She looked up at him. "There will be a moment this week when you hate me, when you wish that town had scared me off. I want you to know now, while you still like me a little, that I'm not your enemy. The numbers aren't your enemy. The only enemy in this room is the part of you that would rather feel proud than see clear." Ethan stood in the doorway of his father's office and felt the last of the day's heat go out of him. "My brother trusted you," he said. "That's more'n I've got to go on. But it's something." "It's everything," Claire said. "It's how we start." She opened the first book. And Ethan Cole, who had run 4,000 acres his whole life, without ever once looking down, pulled the second chair up to his father's desk, and for the first time in his life, sat down to look. The lamp burned low by the time Claire turned the first page, and Ethan watched her hands more than the book. They moved slow, careful, like a woman handling something that might bite. "You always start at the front?" he asked. "No." She didn't look up. "I start where a man wants me to look so I can learn what he's steering me toward. Then I go where he doesn't." "And where's that?" "The back, the last year, the part that's still warm." She turned another page. "The lies are always freshest near the end." He didn't have an answer for that, so he sat. For a long while, there was nothing but the scratch of her pencil and the tick of the mantel clock, and somewhere out past the window, the low complaint of cattle settling for the night. She made a mark, then another, then she stopped, and her pencil hung above the page, and she went very still. "What?" Ethan said. "Feed." "What about it?" "You bought hay in July." Ethan frowned. "So, you've got 4,000 acres of summer grass, Mr. Cole. Why would a man buy hay in July? Sometimes the—" He stopped, thought about it. We don't buy hay in summer. We cut our own and store it against winter. We sell hay in a good summer." Claire turned the ledger around so he could see it. Her finger rested under a line of figures in that cramped, tidy hand he half recognized and couldn't place. "Then explain to me why you paid the Harmon Feed and Supply Company $211 for 40 ton of hay on the 14th of July. Ethan leaned in. The heat that had left him at the gate came flooding back up his neck. That's a mistake. Somebody wrote it wrong. It's not a mistake." She flipped back 3 pages, 4 laid them out. "It's here in June, it's here in August, it's here last August, and the one before. Every summer. 40 ton of hay you don't need from a company that shares half a name with the man who does your banking." She let that sit. "Do you cut your own hay, or don't you?" Mr. Cole answered plainly, "because a great deal hangs on it." "We cut our own." His voice had gone hard and low. "Silas oversees it. Has for 30 years. We put up more hay than any spread on this mountain." "Then where does it go?" He stopped again. He was stopping a lot, and he hated it. Hated the way each of her small, quiet questions opened a door in a house he'd thought he knew every room of. "It goes to the barn, the winter barn. We feed it out." How much what? How much do you put up, and how much do you feed out, and does anyone in this operation ever count the difference? The clock ticked. Ethan opened his mouth and found nothing in it. He did not know how much hay they cut. He knew they cut a lot. He knew the wagons came in heavy, and the loft was full by September and empty by April. He had never in his life counted a bale. "No," he said finally. "Nobody counts it." Claire nodded slowly, and it was not a triumphant nod. That was the thing about her that kept catching him off guard. There was no pleasure in her when she found a wound. Only a kind of grim attention, the way a good doctor probes a break to see how bad. "So you cut hay you don't count, and you buy hay you don't need, from a company named Harmon." She closed the book on her own finger to mark the place. "Mr. Cole, I've been in this office 90 minutes. I have not slept in 3 days. And I've already found a man being sold his own grass back to him at $200 a summer." "Bah." Ethan was on his feet before he knew he'd stood. "You're saying somebody's stealing my hay and selling it back to me." "I'm saying the numbers say that. I don't say things. The numbers do. I only read them out loud." She looked up at him steady. "Sit down. We're 40 pages into 11 years. If this is what's on the surface, I need you calm for what's underneath. Can you be calm?" "No." "Good. An honest answer." She almost smiled. Almost. "Then be angry quietly and turn the lamp up. We're going to be here a while." Silas found them at dawn. He came in with coffee he hadn't been asked to bring, took one look at the desk, the books spread wide, the papers pinned under stones, Claire's own ledger, black with figures, Ethan sitting gray-faced and unshaven, with his sleeves rolled and his eyes red from a night he plainly hadn't slept, and the old man went still in the doorway. "You been at it all night," Silas said. "Silas." Ethan didn't look up. "How much hay do we cut?" "How much hay? In a season. How many ton?" The pause was small, but Claire caught it. Ethan didn't. He was too far gone in the books, but Claire's head came up like a hawk, hearing a mouse in the grass, and she watched the old foreman's face, the way she watched everything, reading it, adding it, carrying the one. "Depends on the year," Silas said. "Good year plenty." "That ain't a number, Silas." "Ranching ain't numbers, son. Your daddy." "My daddy's dead." It came out sharper than Ethan meant. He rubbed his face with both hands. I'm sorry, I ain't slept. But I need a number. She found something and it don't sit right, and I need to know how much hay comes off this land. Silas set the coffee down. His hand, Claire noticed, was not quite steady, and a man who'd poured coffee at that ranch for 40 years did not have an unsteady hand for no reason. I'd have to look at the cutting records, Silas said. There ain't any cutting records, Claire said quietly. The whole room turned to her. I've been through 11 years of this ledger, she went on, not unkindly her eyes on Silas the entire time. There are records for everything else. Cattle bought, cattle sold, wages, repairs the doctor when the Peterson boy broke his arm, the price of nails to the penny. There is not one single line in 11 years recording how much hay this ranch cuts. She let it settle. Only how much it buys. Silas said nothing. That's a strange gap, Silas, Claire said. In a set of books this careful, the man who kept these wrote down a 2-cent box of tax, but never once wrote down 40 tons of hay coming in from your own fields. She tilted her head, almost like somebody wanted the hay we grow and the hay we buy to never sit on the same page where a body might compare them. The silence stretched until it hummed. Silas, Ethan said slowly, who keeps the books? And there it was, the question from the gate come back around, and this time there was no dodging it. Claire watched the old man's throat work. I do the cutting, Silas said. The stock, the men. I never touch the books, Ethan. You know that. Your daddy kept 'em close and then... And then who? Ethan stood. After Daddy, who kept them? Silas looked at the floor. Harmon's boy, he said finally. Young Thomas Harmon. Comes up from town first of every month. Been doing it since your father passed. Takes the receipt squares the accounts brings 'em back. He looked up, and his old eyes were wet, and Claire understood that whatever this man was guilty of, it wasn't greed, it was something older and sadder than that. I told your brother. When he asked to see him that winter, I told him Thomas had him down in town and they were fine and he shouldn't worry. I told him that. His voice broke clean in half. 'Cause that's what I'd been told to tell anyone who asked. And I didn't, Ethan, I swear before God I didn't know it was a lie. I thought I was keeping peace. I thought, who told you to say it? Claire cut in gentle and merciless all at once. Who told you to turn people away from the book, Silas? The old man looked at her and then at Ethan, and the answer was already written all over his ruined face before he said it. Harmon, he whispered. Old man Harmon himself. Said it was delicate. Said the estate was tangled after your daddy, and it'd upset folks to see it half settled. Said just send anyone asking down to him and he'd handle it. Silas pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. I've knowed Cole Harmon since we was boys. I trusted him. God forgive me, Ethan, I sent your own brother away from the truth and told myself I was being kind. Ethan sat down very slowly, as though his legs had stopped trusting him. Daniel came to me too, he said to no one. That same winter. Said, let me look at the books, Ethan. I've a head for figures. And I said, his voice failed. I said they're handled, Danny. Get some rest. He looked up, and there was something in his face Claire had never seen on a man that hard. We both did it. You and me both, Silas. We both stood at the door of the truth and told my brother to go to bed. Nobody spoke. Outside, the sun cleared the ridge and the first light came flat and gold across the office floor, and none of the 3 people in it moved to meet the new day. Jack. She made him ride the ranch with her that afternoon. He'd expected he didn't know what he'd expected. That she'd want to see the cattle maybe. Admire the stock. Instead, she rode with a small notebook balanced on the saddle horn and asked him questions that had nothing to do with anything a rancher would ask. How many men on the payroll? 9. 10 counting Silas. How many did I count in the yard this morning? Ethan opened his mouth to say 9 and then actually thought about it, actually counted the faces and stopped his horse. 6, he said. There were 6. Where are the other 3? They'll be out on the range. Line camps. North fence. When did you last see them? He didn't answer because he couldn't remember, And she watched him not remember and wrote something in the little book and wrote on. At the north pasture, she reined up and looked a long time at the cattle strung out across the grass. Then she said, "Those aren't yours." Ethan laughed. "I've been staring at these cows since I was 6 years old, ma'am. I reckon I know my own brand." "Read me the brands." He squinted, and the laugh died on his mouth. Because scattered through the Cole cattle, his cattle, the ones he'd have sworn on his father's grave, were every one of them. His were beeves wearing a brand he didn't know. A lazy H burned clean into the hip. Dozens of them, grazing his grass, drinking his water. That's... He rode closer and his voice dropped to something dangerous. "That's not my brand." "No. Somebody's running cattle on my land." "Somebody's been running cattle on your land," Claire said, "for at least 3 summers, judging by the ages of those calves. And feeding them your uncounted hay through the winter, I'd wager, which is where 40 tons a year has been quietly going." She closed her notebook. "The hay you then buy back in July, when the loft comes up short. Do you see it now, Mr. Cole? It's not one theft, it's a machine. It's been running so smooth and so long that everyone stopped hearing it." Ethan sat his horse in the middle of his own pasture and stared at another man's cattle eating his living, and something in his chest that had been proud his whole life cracked straight down the center. "Whose brand?" he said, very quiet. "The Lazy H. Whose is it?" Claire looked at him with something close to pity. "You already know," she said. "You've known since Silas said the name this morning. You just don't want to say it out loud because once you say it, you can't go back to the man you were yesterday. Say it anyway. I don't have to." She turned her horse toward home. "It's registered at the county seat, Mr. Cole. The Lazy H. Registered 11 years ago, the same season your father died. To the Harmon family. To your banker. To the man who told your foreman to keep your brother away from the books." She paused and added the last of it softly, and it landed like a stone dropped down a well. "Your brother didn't die worried about money, Mr. Cole. He died worried about you, because he'd figured most of this out, and he knew that the day you learned the truth, it wouldn't be the theft that broke you. It'd be the trust." Chapter 5. They didn't speak most of the ride back. There wasn't anything to say that the land itself hadn't already said every fence post and grazing thief of it. But at the last gate, Ethan stopped. "You knew," he said. "Before you ever left Kansas City, you knew it'd be Harmon." "I suspected." Claire folded her hands on the horn. "Your brother's letters mentioned a man in town he didn't trust but couldn't prove anything on. He never wrote the name. He was afraid the letters might be read." She looked at him. "But he described the man. And he described the fear of a small town where the banker and the sheriff and the feed store and the deacon are all the same 4 families. And I've unwound enough of those to know what one looks like from the outside." She hesitated. "I didn't tell you last night because you wouldn't have believed me. You'd have thrown me off the mountain for slandering a family friend. You had to find the Lazy H yourself, on your own grass, with your own eyes." "You planned that?" Something like a laugh bitter escaped him. "The whole ride out here. You steered me to that pasture." "Yes." "You read me like a..." He stopped. "Like a ledger," Claire finished. "I did warn you." And then softer, dropping the armor 1/2 inch. "I'm sorry. It's a cruel way to learn a thing, but it's the only way a proud man ever learns it, not by being told, but by seeing. If I'd said Harmon's stealing from you, you'd have defended him out of loyalty. So I let the grass tell you instead. The grass has no loyalty. It just grows where it's watered and gets eaten by whoever's standing there." Ethan looked at her for a long moment across the space between their horses. "You're a hard woman, Claire Whitmore." "I'm a precise woman, Mr. Cole. The town calls it hard because precise women frighten them." She nudged her horse through the gate. "Your brother didn't find me hard. Your brother found me the only person who'd tell him the truth. There's a difference. You'll learn it before the week's out or you won't. Either way, the cattle are still there, and the hay's still being stolen, and Old Man Harmon is still down in that town right now, squaring your accounts by lamplight and adding you up like a column he's already decided how to total. That was the word that stuck in Ethan through supper and past it and deep into the night total. Like Harmon had already decided how the whole thing ended, and the Coles were just numbers being carried down the page toward some final line only Harmon could see. He couldn't sleep. He came down near midnight and found the lamp already lit in the office, and Claire already at the desk, still in her day clothes. Her hair come half loose, 3 books open at once, and her finger moving between them. "You don't sleep," he said. "I'll sleep when I've found the bottom." She didn't look up. "There's a bottom to this, there always is, and I'm close." She tapped one book, then another. "Come here. I want your eyes on something because you know this land and I don't, and I've hit a thing I can't square." He came around the desk and looked where she pointed. "Every fall," she said, "there's a sale. Cattle sold to market. Big number, good money comes in like clockwork every October. It's the biggest single line in the whole ledger. It's the number that's kept you believing this ranch is fat and healthy." She looked up at him. "Where does it happen, the sale? Who buys? Who drives the cattle to market?" "Harmon arranges it." The words came out slow, and Ethan heard how they sounded, even as he said them. "Has a buyer down in the territory. Harmon takes the herd down every October, sells 'em, brings back the bank draft." He stopped. His own voice sounded far away. I don't go. I never once went to the sale. Daddy never went. Harmon's always handled the sale." Claire finished it for him, and her face had gone still and pale in the lamplight. "So let me be sure I understand your entire operation," Mr. Cole laid out plain. "A man named Harmon keeps your books. A man named Harmon banks your money. A man named Harmon told your foreman to keep everyone away from those books. A man named Harmon runs cattle under his own brand on your grass. And a man named Harmon takes your herd to a sale you have never once attended, sells it to a buyer you've never met for a price you've never verified, and brings you back a piece of paper telling you how much you made." She set her pencil down very carefully. "Ethan, how do you know the cattle are even sold?" The clock ticked. "How do you know," she said quieter still, "that the number in this book that's kept you happy for 11 years is real at all?" Ethan Cole stood in his father's office with his hands flat on his father's desk, and for the first time in his life he understood that he had never owned this ranch. He had lived on it, bled on it, buried his family in it, and another man had been sitting in a town 9 miles away, holding the only pencil that mattered, writing down whatever kept the big, stupid, trusting Coles asleep in their beds. "I don't," he whispered. "I don't know a thing. I never did." "No," Claire said. And then she did something she had not done since she'd climbed down off that wagon. She reached across the desk and put her hand over his, just for a moment, just long enough. "But you're awake now. And a man who's finally awake is the most dangerous thing there is to a man who got rich off him being asleep." She drew her hand back and squared the books. "We ride to the county seat in the morning. Not town, the county seat. 2 hours further, where Harmon has no friends and the records don't lie. I want to see that brand registration with my own eyes and the deed and every mortgage anyone's ever taken against this land." She looked up at him, and the ice was all gone now, burned off, and what was under it was something that made his chest ache. "Because I don't think your brother's the only one Harmon's been counting, Mr. Cole. I think he's been carrying the whole valley down the page for 11 years, and I think we're about to find the total he's been driving toward." Ethan looked at the row of soft-cornered books that held his family's whole life in a stranger's hand. "Then we ride at first light," he said. "Yes. And Claire?" He stopped. It was the first time he'd used her Christian name, and they both heard it. "That thing you said, at the gate, about there being a moment I'd hate you." He turned his hat in his hands. "It ain't come. I keep waiting on it. Every ugly thing you dig up, I keep waiting to hate the one digging. And it don't come." Claire looked at him a long moment across the lamplight. "That's because I'm not the one who did this to you," she said softly. I'm just the one who turned the light on. It's easy to hate the light for a minute when you've been sleeping, but you're not a man who blames the sun for the morning. She closed the last book. Your brother wasn't either. It's the best thing about the both of you. Now go to bed, Ethan. Whatever we find tomorrow, you'll want your wits for it, because Harmon doesn't know we're coming yet. Her jaw set. And that's the only advantage we have.
미안해.
Ethan went to the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. He'll know by tomorrow night, he said. Small valley. Somebody'll see us ride to the county seat, and word'll be back to Harmon before we are. I know. Then the week you asked for just got shorter, Claire said, and blew out the lamp. Considerably. So sleep fast, Mr. Cole. We're not auditing a ranch anymore. We're racing a man to the truth about his own life. And he's had an 11-year head start. They rode out before the light, and they were not fast enough. Ethan knew it the moment they crested the last rise before the county road and saw the second set of wagon tracks cut fresh across their own, headed the same direction toward the county seat laid down not an hour before. Somebody's ahead of us, he said, reining up. Claire studied the tracks without dismounting. One horse running hard, left maybe an hour ago, from the direction of town. Harmon, or his boy, either way. She lifted her eyes to the road ahead. He knows. How? We told nobody. We left in the dark. You told Silas we'd be riding to the county seat, last night, in the office. Claire's voice was flat, but there was something underneath it now tight and cold. Silas didn't sleep either. And Silas is an old man who spent 40 years being told to send trouble down to Harmon. She nudged her horse forward. I don't think he meant harm. I think he woke this morning eaten alive with guilt over your brother, and I think he rode to Harmon to warn him not out of loyalty, but because a frightened man runs to the one who's always told him what to do. Habit's the last thing to die in a person, Mr. Cole. Sometimes it outlives the man himself. Ethan felt the betrayal go through him like cold water, and then, strange thing, felt it turn to something almost like grief. Because she was right, and he knew she was right, and he could see it Silas at dawn gray, and shaking, saddling up, riding down to the only man he'd trusted longer than he'd trusted the Coles. So he's warned, Ethan said. And now we're racing a man who's already at the finish. Then we ride harder. Claire kicked her horse into a run. The records don't care who gets there first, Ethan. They only care who reads them, and he can't burn a county courthouse. But he could empty a drawer. They knew it the moment they walked into the recorder's office, dust-caked and breathless, and found the county clerk, a mild, spectacled man named Purvis, standing at his own filing cabinet with a look of profound and helpless confusion on his face. Mr. Cole? Purvis blinked. Twice in one morning the Cole ranch is asked after, what in the world's happening up your mountain? Ethan went still. Who asked after it first? Why, Thomas Harmon. Came in, not half an hour ago, hot as a horse ridden too hard, said his father, needed the brand registrations and the deed abstracts for a legal settlement, he said. Said it was urgent. Purvis gestured at the open drawer, apologetic. I let him take the file. He's a Harmon. His family's done the county's banking 30 years. I'd no cause to... You let him take it. Claire's voice cracked across the room like a whip, and mild Purvis flinched. The originals. The county's originals. You handed a man the only proof of who owns what in this valley, and let him walk out the door with it. He said his father is the man those records incriminate. Claire was already moving at the cabinet, already pulling the drawer wide, and going through it with fast, furious hands. Brand registrations. Deeds. Mortgages. What did he take exactly? Tell me exactly. Purvis wrung his hands. The Cole file. The Harmon file. And a third. He asked for a third. Claire stopped. Whose? I don't recall the name offhand. It was whose. The clerk swallowed. Peterson, he said. The Peterson homestead file. The little spread down the valley from the Coles. I don't know why he'd want... And Claire Whitmore went white to the lips. Ethan saw it happen, saw the color drop out of her the way it had dropped out of him at the north pasture, saw the precise, unshakable woman who read men like columns of figures put one hand flat on the cabinet to steady herself. "Claire." He crossed to her. "What is it? What's Peterson?" "Peterson." She said it like a woman testing whether a floor would hold her weight. "The boy who broke his arm, the doctor bill, the 2-cent box of tacks." Her eyes came up to his, and there was horror in them. Real horror, the first pure feeling he'd seen her fail to master. "Ethan, the Petersons are in your ledger, all through it, small sums. Neighborly sums, you loaned them a plow team, you sold them seed at cost. Your father stood godfather to one of the children. I passed right over it. Small, kindly numbers between neighbors, I thought. I filed it away as decent." Her voice shook. "But if Harmon wants the Peterson deed the same morning he's running from us, then the Petersons don't have their land anymore. And I'd bet my life they don't know it." I'm saying I think I've been reading your books for 2 days, looking for how Harmon robbed you." She pushed off the cabinet, grabbed the remaining papers, spread them on the clerk's desk with hands that were finally visibly trembling. "And I never once stopped to ask how many other families on this mountain have a Harmon holding their pencil. How many other men have never been to their own sale? How many widows are being sold their own hay?" She looked up. "Ethan, I think your ranch isn't the crime. I think your ranch is just the biggest room in a house that's been on fire for 11 years, and nobody in the whole valley can smell the smoke because Harmon told every last one of them the same thing he told Silas. Don't trouble yourself, I'll handle it." The clerk had gone gray. "Mr. Purvis," Claire said, rounding on him. "The copies. County law requires a bound copy ledger of every filing. Harmon took the loose originals. Where is the bound copy?" Purvis's mouth opened and closed. The bound record. Yes, in the vault. But Mr. Cole misses. The bound record's only as good as what's entered in it, and entries can be amended," Claire finished grimly. "By whom?" "By the recorder of record, which for 11 years, Purvis's voice failed him. "Which for 11 years was the previous clerk, before me, old Mr. Dunmore, who retired to a very fine house, bought with money nobody could ever quite account for." The room went silent. "Dunmore," Ethan said slowly. "Cole Harmon's brother-in-law, his wife's brother." Purvis sat down heavily in his chair. "Oh Lord, oh dear Lord, it's the entries. If Dunmore amended the entries and Harmon held the originals, and no one ever once came to check because Harmon told them all not to trouble." He put his face in his hands. "I've been sitting on top of it for 2 years and never saw. I just filed what I was given, same as everyone." "Same as everyone," Claire repeated softly. And Ethan watched her file that away too, not with triumph, never with triumph, but with the weary recognition of a woman who had unwound too many of these to be surprised by the shape of one more. "That's how it always works, Mr. Cole. It's never one wicked genius. It's one patient thief and 100 decent people who were all told kindly not to trouble themselves. And they were grateful for it. That's the cruelest part. They thanked him. Meine Pusheg." They rode back up the mountain in the worst kind of silence, the silence of 2 people who now knew too much and had lost the race to be the only ones who knew it. Halfway up, Ethan spoke. "We have to warn the Petersons. We have to do more than that." Claire's jaw was set. "But yes, first, before Harmon has time to think of what to do with a deed he's suddenly frightened of. If the Petersons raise a cry, the whole thing cracks open because they're not a proud rancher who never went to his sale, Ethan. They're a poor family that'll have nothing to protect and nothing to lose by shouting. Harmon can keep a proud man quiet with his pride. He can't keep a desperate man quiet at all. Then we ride to the Petersons tonight." "Tonight?" She glanced at the sky. "Before word gets around we've been to the county seat, which it will have by supper." She was quiet a moment. "Ethan, when we get back, Silas." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "He warned Harmon," Claire said gently. You have to decide what you're going to do about that before we ride into your own yard, because he's going to be standing there. And how you meet him is going to decide whether he's ours or Harmon's for the rest of this. And we need him ours." She looked over. "He knows this valley better than any man alive. He knows every family Harmon's touched. He is the single most valuable witness on this mountain, and he's the man who betrayed you this morning. Both things are true at once. What are you going to do with that?" Ethan rode a long way before he answered. "My daddy fired a man once," he said finally. "Good man. Made one mistake, cost us a season. Daddy ran him off the mountain and never spoke his name again, and I was proud of him for it. Thought that was strength." He shook his head slowly. "I've been thinking a lot the last 2 days about all the things I was proud of. Turns out most of them were just pride wearing a Sunday coat." He looked at her. "Silas has loved this family 40 years. He made a mistake this morning because he was scared and grieving, and old habits are cruel. You said so yourself." His jaw worked. "I'm not going to run him off. I'm going to put him to work. He wants to make it right. Let him. He knows where the bodies are buried on this mountain, literally some of them. That's worth more than my pride." Claire looked at him for a long moment, and something moved across her face that had nothing to do with numbers. "Your brother said you'd get there," she said quietly. "In his last letter. He said Ethan's stubborn as the mountain, but the mountain melts in spring, you just have to wait for the sun." Her voice caught. "I thought it was a widow's fawn nonsense when I read it. I was wrong. He knew you better dead than most people know their brothers alive." Ethan looked straight ahead and didn't trust himself to speak, and they rode the rest of the way up in a silence that had gone somewhere on that mountain road, from grief to something else. Silas was in the yard when they rode in exactly as Claire had said he'd be, and the moment he saw their faces, he knew that they knew. He didn't run. Ethan gave him that. The old man stood his ground with his hat in his hands and his chin up, and the tears already starting, and he waited for whatever was coming. The way a man waits for a storm he called down on his own head. "Ethan," he said. You rode to Harmon this morning." "Yes." No hedging, no excuse. The old man's voice was steady, even as his hands shook. "I woke, and I couldn't the thing about your brother, I couldn't carry it, and I didn't know where to put it, so I put it where I always put things. I rode down to Cole Harmon, and I told him you'd found the hay and the brand, and you meant to ride to the county seat." He looked Ethan dead in the eye. "And halfway back up the mountain, I understood what I'd done, and I have been standing in this yard for 4 hours praying you'd forgive me and knowing you shouldn't." Ethan swung down off his horse, walked up to the old man, and Silas closed his eyes, waiting. "He got there first," Ethan said. "Harmon's boy. Took the originals from the county. There's more, Silas. It ain't just us. It's the Petersons. It's maybe the whole valley." Silas's eyes came open. "The Petersons. You know 'em better than anybody. You know every family down there." Ethan put his hand on the old man's shoulder. Not gentle, not soft, but there. "So here's what's going to happen. You are not fired. You are not run off. You made a mistake, and you'll wear it, but you'll wear it working, not grieving. I need you. She needs you." He tightened his grip. "You want to make it right for Daniel? Then you're going to help us warn every family Harmon's got his hooks in before he can get to them first. Starting tonight, starting with the Petersons. Can you do that?" Silas stared at him. And then the old man did something that undid every hard thing Ethan had ever believed about strength. He broke openly, standing in the yard, 40 years of it coming out at once. "Your daddy would have horsewhipped me off this mountain." He wept. "Yeah," Ethan said, and his own voice wasn't steady either. "He would have, and that's why we lost 11 years to a thief, Silas. 'Cause my daddy'd rather be right than be smart. I'm done being my daddy." He pulled the old man into a rough embrace, brief and fierce. "Now dry your face. We got families to see before dark. Where do we start?" Silas wiped his eyes with the back of a shaking hand. "The Petersons are furthest, but the Aldridge widow's closest, and he stopped. His face changed. Ethan, the Aldridge widow in town. She lost her husband 3 years back, and Harmon's been handling her affairs ever since. She was in the store yesterday, wasn't she, when you... She was one of the 2 women running me down, Ethan said slowly, calling Claire a crow. Claire had gone very still on her horse. Say that again, Silas, she said, about the Aldridge widow. Harmon handles her whole estate, has since her Tom passed. She thinks the world of him, tells everyone he saved her from ruin. Silas looked between them. Why? Why's that matter? But Claire was already off her horse, already pulling her own ledger from her saddlebag, already flipping to a page she'd marked and forgotten. Aldridge, she muttered. Aldridge. There was an Aldridge in your books, Ethan? A payment to an Aldridge every quarter, small regular. I marked it as a lease, or an annuity, and moved on. She found it. Her finger stopped, and she looked up, and the horror was back in her face, worse than at the courthouse. Ethan, your ranch has been paying the Aldridge widow $40 a quarter for 3 years. For what? That's just it. For nothing. There's no note, no service, no reason. Just $40 a quarter from the Cole Ranch to a widow in town who thinks Cole Harmon is a saint. Claire's hand dropped. He's using your money, Ethan. He's stealing from you and then handing a piece of it to that poor woman as her husband's pension, so she'll defend him to her dying day. So she'll stand in a general store and call the auditor a crow. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. He didn't just build a theft. He built an army. He's been robbing you and buying the valley's love with the proceeds, and every soul he's stolen from thanks him for it, because they don't know the coin he pays them with was picked from their own pockets. The yard had gone silent except for the wind. That's... Ethan couldn't find the word. Evil, Silas said hoarsely. That's the word. That's plain evil, and I sent your brother to his knees before it. No. Claire closed the ledger. It's worse than evil, Silas, because it doesn't feel like evil to a single person inside it. The widow feels loved. You felt loyal. Ethan felt proud. Purvis felt dutiful. Every one of you was handed a good feeling in exchange for your eyes, and you all took the trade gladly, because that's the trade people make every day of their lives. She swung back up onto her horse, and her voice had gone hard as the county road, which is exactly why it's about to come apart. Because there's one thing Cole Harmon never once had to reckon with in 11 years. She looked at Ethan. Somebody who was never on the mountain long enough to be bought. Somebody with no loyalty to spend, and no pride to protect, and no good feeling he could hand her to make her look away. Her jaw set. Me. I'm the one variable he never entered in his book, and I intend to be the one that breaks his total. Gentai. They found the Petersons at supper. Ethan had known the family his whole life, without ever really knowing them, the way you know the smaller, poorer neighbors with a nod at church and a wave on the road. Elias Peterson was a lean, worn man of 50, with a wife gone gray before her time, and the boy now healed whose broken arm had made a 2-cent line in a stolen ledger. They welcomed the 3 riders in with the frightened, over-eager hospitality of poor folks who have learned that a visit from the big ranch usually means trouble. Claire didn't waste it. Mr. Peterson, she said when they'd been seated and offered the last of the coffee. I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer plain, and I promise you before God that however you answer, we are here to help and not to harm. She folded her hands. Do you own your land? Elias Peterson blinked. Course I do. Homesteaded it. 22 years. Proved it up myself. Do you have the deed? Well? And there it was. The pause. The same pause Silas had given in the office. The same pause that had run all through this like a crack through a wall. Harmon keeps it. Down at the bank. Safe. Keeps all our papers. Says a homestead deed's too important to leave in a house that might burn. He said it proudly. He said it the way a man repeats something he's been trained to be grateful for. Been keeping it since I took the small loan against the Northfield 10 years back. Long paid off now. Is it? Claire said softly. Is it paid off, Mr. Peterson? Have you seen it marked, paid? Have you held the deed in your own two hands since you signed that loan? The Peterson kitchen went dead quiet. Ethan watched Elias Peterson's face change, watched the pride curdle into confusion, and the confusion into the first cold edge of fear, the exact progression he'd felt himself in the north pasture 2 days before. Mrs. Peterson's hand had crept across the table to grip her husband's. He said it was handled, Elias whispered. Every year I asked, and every year he said, Don't trouble yourself. All three of them said at once, Ethan, Silas. Claire, the words falling out of them together like a curse spoken 3 ways. Elias Peterson looked around the table at their faces, and the last of the color left him. How bad, he said. Whatever it is, tell me how bad. Claire reached into her bag and drew out a single sheet of paper, a copy she'd made in her own hand in the recorder's office before Purvis had stopped shaking long enough to notice. She laid it on the table between the coffee cups. Mr. Peterson, she said, this morning before we could reach the county Cole Harmon's son took the original of your deed out of the recorder's office. He took it because he's frightened. And a man like Harmon only gets frightened about a piece of paper for one reason. She met his eyes. Because that paper doesn't say what you think it says. I believe, and I will prove it or die trying, that the loan you took 10 years ago against your Northfield was never marked paid. I believe it was quietly renewed and grown and renewed again in a book only Harmon and his brother-in-law could touch. I believe that on paper, Mr. Peterson, in the eyes of the county, you may not own 1 acre of the land your family has bled on for 22 years. She let it land. And then, before the man could crumble, she put her hand flat on the table. And I believe we caught it in time, which is why I'm sitting in your kitchen tonight, instead of reading about your foreclosure in the spring. Mrs. Peterson made a small broken sound. Elias Peterson stared at the paper as though it might rise up and strike him. 22 years, he said. I dug the well by hand. I buried 2 babies in that ground. His voice rose cracked broke. He come to my boy's bedside when the arm was broke. He prayed with us. He held my wife's hand and told her the Lord would provide, and all that time he had our deed in a drawer planning to, he couldn't finish it. Yes, Claire said quietly. He did. And then Ethan Cole leaned forward and put his big scarred hand over the poor man's shaking one and said the thing that changed everything. Elias, he said, look at me. He's got your deed. He's got mine. He's got the widow Aldridge's, and God knows how many more, and he's been running his cattle on my grass and selling my herd at a sale I never seen, and paying that poor woman in town with money he stole from you and me both. He tightened his grip. For 11 years he did it, 'cause every one of us was too proud, or too poor, or too grateful, or too scared to walk into that bank and say, show me. One at a time, he owned us. One at a time, we were nothing to him. He stood up, and something in the set of his shoulders had changed the something Claire had been waiting 3 days to see, the thing that turns a man who reacts into a man who acts. But we ain't one at a time anymore, Elias. Not after tonight. Tonight there's you and me and Silas, who knows every family this snake's touched, and there's her. He nodded at Claire. Who can read his own books back to him in a courtroom until he chokes on them. His voice dropped low and certain, and absolutely without pride. He built his whole 11 years on us, never talking to each other. So we're going to do the one thing he never once planned for. Elias Peterson looked up, tears standing in his eyes. What's that? We're going to talk to each other. Ethan set his hat back on his head. Every family, every stolen deed, every widow he's got dancing to his tune. We're going to knock on every door on this mountain and say the words he trained us never to say. He turned toward the door, and Claire rose to follow him and Silas after her. And for the first time in 11 years, the Cole Ranch and the Peterson homestead stood on the same side of a fight nobody had known they were losing. Which words? Elias asked, rising. Ethan stopped in the doorway. Show me the books, he said. That's all it ever was. 4 words. and not one of us was brave enough to say them out loud. He looked back at the poor man's kitchen, at the woman gripping the table, at the healed boy watching from the stairs. Well, we're saying them now, all of us, together. And Cole Harmon's going to find out what his arithmetic looks like when the numbers finally start talking back. They knocked on every door for 3 days, and by the third night, the mountain had changed. It started slow, the way these things do. The first 2 families shut their doors halfway through Ethan's, saying his peace frightened Loyal, sure that a Cole run mad had come to slander the good man who held their papers. But the 3rd family listened, and the 4th had already quietly been wondering. And by the 2nd day, when word got round that Elias Peterson, poor proud, careful. Elias, who never said a hard word about anybody, was telling folks that Cole Harmon had stolen his homestead out from under him, the doors began to open before Ethan even reached them. Claire kept the count. She kept everything. By the end of the 3rd day, she had in her own hand, in her own black ledger, the names of 19 families on that mountain who had handed Cole Harmon their deeds, their loans, their trust, and their silence. 19. In a valley of maybe 40. He owned half the mountain. She said that 3rd night back in Ethan's office, the lamp burning low again, and not a soul knew it because he never once foreclosed. That was his genius. He never took the land. He just held the paper that let him take it whenever he pleased and used the holding to keep everyone grateful and quiet. Why kill the cow when you can milk it forever and have it thank you for the privilege? So what changed? Ethan said. Why'd he start taking the Peterson deed now if he never took land before? Claire looked at him a long moment. Because of me, she said. Because a banker's daughter with a claim on the biggest ranch on the mountain wrote to say she was coming to audit. He'd have gotten that letter the same week you did. Harmon reads the mail before it goes up the mountain. I'd stake my life on it. And he knew what I was. Everyone up here calls me the ledger like it's a curse. Down in the banking world, it's a warning. Her jaw tightened. He knew that if I opened your books, I'd find the thread. And if I pulled the thread, the whole valley would come apart in my hands. So he started moving. Consolidating. Pulling the deeds he'd need to run, converting paper to land to money he could carry. He wasn't stealing the Peterson farm to keep it Ethan. He was stealing it to sell it fast before I could prove it was stolen. He's not building anymore. She closed the ledger. He's fleeing. He just hasn't left yet. A cold feeling went down Ethan's spine. Then we don't have a week. We never had a week. We have until Harmon decides the mountain's too hot to stand on. Claire stood. Which is why tomorrow we don't knock on any more doors. Tomorrow we stop gathering and we start finishing. Tomorrow I write to the one man in this territory Cole Harmon can't buy, can't scare, and can't send to bed with. Don't trouble yourself. Who's that? The federal circuit judge. She said it flat and certain. Land fraud across 19 homesteads involving falsified county records and a former county recorder, that's not a matter for a town sheriff who plays cards with Harmon on Fridays. That's federal. That crosses the line from a local man cheating his neighbors to a conspiracy to defraud homesteaders of land granted under federal law. And there is a circuit judge who rides this territory twice a year. Her eyes glinted. He's due in the county seat in 9 days. I checked the docket at the courthouse before Purvis stopped shaking. 9 days, Ethan. If we can hold Harmon on this mountain for 9 days and put 19 sworn statements and 1 stolen ledger in front of a federal judge. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. And if we can't hold him, then he's gone with the money and the deeds, and the poor Petersons spend the rest of their lives in a rented room, and the widow Aldridge dies, still thinking he was a saint. Claire's voice hardened. So we hold him. Harmon made the first move. He made it the next morning, and he made it. Ethan had to admit, like a man who'd been running things for 11 years and knew exactly which levers to pull. He didn't come himself. He sent the sheriff. Sheriff Dobbs rode up the mountain with 2 deputies and a paper, and he had the grace at least to look ashamed while he read it. Ethan, Dobbs said, not dismounting. I got a complaint sworn out against you, and against the woman. He nodded stiffly at Claire, who stood on the porch with her arms folded. Cole Harmon says you've been riding this mountain 3 days, spreading slander against him. Says you've frightened his clients, damaged his good name, interfered with his lawful business. Says the woman's been forging documents and impersonating a legal auditor. He cleared his throat. There's a charge here for criminal defamation and one for fraud against her. He held up the paper miserably. I gotta bring you both down to answer for it, today, before the town magistrate. Ethan felt the whole 3 days' work tilt under him. The town magistrate, he said. That'd be Dunmore, Claire said quietly, from the porch. The retired county recorder, Harmon's brother-in-law, the man who amended the entries. She almost laughed, and it was a terrible sound. He's not just fleeing anymore, Ethan. He's counterattacking. He's going to have us arrested for fraud tried by the very man who committed it and convicted before the circuit judge ever crosses the county line. It's brilliant. God help me, it's brilliant. She came down the steps slow and looked up at the sheriff. Sheriff Dobbs, may I ask you something plainly, one honest person to another? Do you believe I forged documents? Dobbs shifted in his saddle. Ma'am, I don't know what to believe. I know Cole Harmon's been square with this town my whole life. Has he? Claire didn't raise her voice. Sheriff, does Cole Harmon hold your papers too? Your house note, your savings? Does he handle your affairs? Dobbs went very still. He does, doesn't he? Claire said softly. Everyone's the same on this mountain. And when a man holds your whole life in his drawer, you don't ask him hard questions. You ride up a mountain and arrest whoever he points you at. She took another step. I'm not asking you to disobey that warrant, Sheriff. I'll come gladly. But before you put me on that horse, I want you to ask yourself one thing on the ride down. Ask yourself when you last held your own house note in your own 2 hands, and whether it says what you think it says. The sheriff didn't answer. But something moved behind his eyes, the first flicker of a doubt, the crack Claire lived by finding. Ethan stepped forward. We'll come, Dobbs, both of us. But I'm bringing Silas, and I'm sending word to the Petersons and every family on this mountain that the Coles have been arrested for telling the truth. His voice carried. You want to march us through town like criminals, fine. But you'll be marching us past 19 families who all just learned the same week that Cole Harmon's been stealing from them. You sure that's the parade Harmon wants? 'Cause a man on the run don't usually ask for a crowd. Dobbs looked at him a long moment. Just come quiet, he said finally. Please, let's not make it a war. It's already a war, Sheriff, Claire said, mounting her horse. It's been a war for 11 years. You just now noticed you were on the wrong side. They didn't march them quiet, and it wasn't a small crowd. By the time the little procession reached the edge of town, word had run ahead of it, the way word does in a valley, and the street was lined. Not with the jeering crowd Harmon would have wanted 3 days ago, the crowd that had called Claire a crow in Miller's store. This was a silent crowd, a watching crowd. 19 families worth of people who had spent 3 sleepless nights turning over everything they'd been grateful for, and were now looking at the woman on the horse with something that was not hate anymore. Mrs. Pruitt was there, the one who'd called Claire a crow on a fence post. She stood at the front of the store porch, and as Claire rode past the older woman, did a thing that stopped Ethan's heart in his chest. She stepped down off the porch into the street and walked alongside Claire's horse. Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Pruitt said. Her voice shook. I said a cruel thing about you, in the store. I called you a... She couldn't say it. My husband's note. Cole Harmon's held it 9 years. I asked him yesterday to let me see it, and he told me not to trouble myself. Her chin came up trembling. I've been troubling myself ever since. So I'll walk with you. If they're arresting the woman who told the truth, they can arrest me too. And then the widow Aldridge stepped down. The woman who'd sworn Harmon saved her from ruin, who'd taken his $40 a quarter and blessed his name for it. He's been paying me a pension, she said, falling in on the other side of Claire's horse, her voice breaking. From my Tom. I thanked him at church every Sunday, And Elias Peterson told me last night that money came out of the coal ranch, not my Tom's estate at all. That there never was an estate that Tom died owing Harmon, and Harmon just—" She pressed her hand to her mouth. "I've been thanking the man who robbed my husband's grave. I'll walk too." One by one, down the length of that street, they stepped down. Elias Peterson and his wife. The Aldridge widow. Mrs. Pruitt. Purvis the clerk who'd ridden up from the county seat that morning with his own conscience finally louder than his fear. Silas walking at the head of them all with his hat in his hand. By the time the procession reached the magistrate's office, Sheriff Dobbs was leading not 2 prisoners, but a column, a whole mountain's worth of people who had finally all at once been brave enough to say the 4 words together. And Cole Harmon was standing on the steps of the magistrate's office, waiting for a quiet arrest, and watching his 11 years walk toward him in the street. Ethan would remember the look on the man's face for the rest of his life. It wasn't fear, not at first. Harmon was too smooth for fear. It was calculation, the look of a man doing sums fast, watching the numbers he'd counted on for a decade suddenly not add up. He'd built the whole thing on people being alone. And here they came together, and Ethan watched the exact moment Cole Harmon realized his arithmetic had failed him. Then the calculation broke, and under it was the fear. And under the fear, Ethan saw it plain, was a small, ordinary, frightened man who had never once in 11 years imagined this street. "Sheriff." Harmon's voice came out too high. He steadied it. "Sheriff, arrest these people. This is a mob. This is exactly the lawlessness I warned you the Coles would—" "Cole Harmon!" Claire's voice cut clean across the street, and it was not loud, but every soul there heard it. She swung down off her horse, walked to the foot of the steps, and looked up at him. "I'm the auditor, the one you had a warrant sworn against for fraud. So let's have the trial, right here, right now, in front of everyone." She held up her black ledger. "You accused me of forging documents. I'll answer it gladly. But a fraud trial needs the real books to compare my forgeries against, doesn't it? So let's send inside for them. Let's have the magistrate, your brother-in-law, Mr. Dunmore, bring out the county's bound records and the coal ledgers and the deeds you had your son take from the courthouse last week." She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman laying down a winning hand, one card at a time. "Let's compare every number in my forged book to every number in your true ones, in front of the whole valley, and let the honest people standing in this street decide who's the liar." Harmon's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You can't," Claire said softly. "Can you? Because there are no true books to compare mine to. There's the ones you cooked and the ones you burned and the deeds you stole, and a brother-in-law magistrate who can't bring out a single honest page without hanging you both." She turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff Dobbs, he swore a warrant against me for fraud. I demand my trial. I demand he produce the genuine records, right now." She spread her hands. "Watch what he does. Watch whether the man crying fraud will show his own books." That's your whole answer, Sheriff. That's the entire case. An innocent man produces his ledgers. A guilty one produces a warrant. The street held its breath, and Cole Harmon, cornered, did the thing that ended him. He looked at the sheriff and the crowd and the woman at the foot of his steps holding up a ledger like a lantern, and instead of calling for his books, he ran. He turned and bolted for the door of the magistrate's office, and the crowd made a sound Ethan had never heard a crowd make, a low, collective gasp of understanding, because everyone, every single soul in that street, had just watched a man accused of nothing choose flight over showing a single honest page. Sheriff Dobbs was off his horse before Ethan could move. 2 long strides, and he had Harmon by the collar on the office steps, and the smooth banker who'd owned the whole mountain for 11 years was suddenly just a small man being held by the coat in front of everyone he'd robbed. "Cole." Dobbs' voice was terrible and quiet. "Why'd you run? If she's the liar, why'd you run from your own books?" He shook him once. 9 years you held my house note. 9 years I never asked. I'm asking now. Where's my deed, Cole? And Cole Harmon, held by the collar in the sun, finally broke, not with a confession, but with the thing worse than a confession, the thing that told the whole street everything. "You don't understand," he said, and his voice had gone to a whine, a small, ugly, pleading thing. "I never took anything. I was holding it. I was managing it. These people, they can't manage their own affairs. They'd have lost it all to worse men than me. I protected this valley. He looked around wildly at the faces at 19 families worth of people he'd called clients, and something in him understood at last that there was no version of this where he was the good man. "I kept it safe," as he screamed. "I kept it all safe." "Safe in your drawer," Elias Peterson said, stepping forward, and his poor, worn voice carried further than any shout. "My homestead, my babies buried in it. You kept it safe in your drawer, waiting to sell it out from under me. You prayed at my boy's bedside coal. You held my wife's hand." His voice cracked. "Safe. You kept us all safe." The word died in the street, and in the silence after it, coal. Harmon stopped struggling and stopped shouting and simply stood there in the sheriff's grip with his 11 years scattered around him in pieces. A man who had told himself a story about being the valley's protector for so long that he'd half believed it, and was only now too late seeing his own true total in the eyes of every person he'd counted. The rest came fast, the way a dam goes fast once the first stone shifts. Purvis the clerk, no longer shaking, produced from his own saddlebag the copies Claire had made in the recorder's office, before the originals were stolen enough to show that the Peterson loan had been renewed, and inflated in Dunmore's hand, years after Elias swore he'd paid it. The magistrate Dunmore, confronted on his own office steps by his own amended entries, folded even faster than Harmon had an old man who'd spent his conscience years ago and had nothing left to spend but the truth. He gave them the vault. He gave them the ledgers Harmon had thought safely hidden behind a brother-in-law's badge. And the ledgers gave them everything. Claire spent that night and the next by lamplight, this time in the county seat. This time with Purvis and Sheriff Dobbs at her elbow, instead of a proud rancher, and she built the thing she'd promised. Not slander, not a mob's rage, but a column of figures so clean and so damning that no judge in the territory could look away from it. 19 families. 11 years. Every stolen deed traced, every inflated loan unwound. Every dollar of the widow Aldridge's false pension tracked back to the coal ranch it had been skimmed from. When the federal circuit judge rode into the county seat 9 days later, exactly on the docket, Claire had read off the courthouse wall. He did not find a town's confused quarrel. He found a bound and witnessed case. 19 sworn statements, a confessed magistrate, a fled and captured banker, and a woman in a gray dress, who could read the whole 11 years to him aloud, without once raising her voice. It took the judge 2 days to hear it, and 1 hour to rule. The deeds were restored. Every one. Elias Peterson walked out of that courthouse with his homestead in his own 2 hands for the first time in 10 years, and Ethan watched the man press the paper to his chest and weep in the street, and had to look away because his own eyes had gone hot. The widow Aldridge got her husband's true estate, small but honest, and the truth of it, which she said afterward, was worth more than the money to know her. Tom hadn't died owing. To know the man she'd blessed had been the thief. Cole Harmon and his brother-in-law were bound over for federal trial on charges that would put them away past any hope of seeing the mountain again, and the coal ranch. Ethan's 4,000 acres, the land his father built and his brother worried over, and a stranger came to count. Got back the 11 years of stolen hay, the phantom cattle, the skimmed sales. All of it tallied to the dollar and ordered repaid from Harmon's own seized accounts. Ethan stood on the courthouse steps when it was done, and Silas came and stood beside him the way he'd stood beside coalmen for 40 years, and neither of them said anything for a long while. "Your daddy," Silas said finally, "would never have believed it. That the whole thing turned on 4 words. Show me the books." He shook his head. 11 years. And all it ever needed was for us to stop being too proud to ask. "Not us," Ethan said. He was watching Claire down in the street where the Peterson children had swarmed her, where Mrs. Pruitt was gripping both her hands, where the whole mountain that had called her a crow was now standing in a circle around her, like she was the only warm thing in a long winter. It needed her Silas. It needed somebody who'd never been up here long enough to be bought. Somebody with no pride to protect, and nobody to be loyal to. His voice went quiet. My brother knew. That's why he wrote her and never me. He knew the only person who could save this valley was the one person in it who owed nobody a single thing. Silas looked at him sideways. She owes somebody now. How's that? She came up here for a dead man. The old foreman put his hat back on. Rode 3 days up a mountain to find out what she couldn't fix in time. Well? He nodded down at the street at the woman surrounded by the families she'd saved. She found it, and she fixed a site more than she came for. So the question ain't what she owes anymore, Ethan. He clapped the younger man on the shoulder and started down the steps. The question's whether you're stubborn enough to let her ride back down that mountain now that the counting's done. 'Cause she'll go if nobody gives her a reason to stay. Women like that don't wait to be asked twice. They just add up the silence and take it for an answer. And Ethan Cole stood on the courthouse steps in the summer sun, watching the woman who had turned the light on in every dark room of his life, and understood that the hardest audit of all was the one he hadn't yet had the courage to open, the one written in his own chest in a hand he'd been too proud to read. He didn't give her a reason to stay. Not that day, and not the next, and Silas watched him not do it with the patient disgust of a man who'd seen Coles waste good things before. Because Ethan Cole, who had learned in 1 week to ask a thief, "Show me the books," could not for the life of him ask a woman to stay. She stayed a while anyway because there was work. The judge's ruling was a mountain of its own, 19 families' deeds to be re-recorded clean. Harmon's seized accounts to be divided fair. The Cole ranch itself to be put back together from the 11 years of rot she'd exposed. Claire stayed for that. She stayed and she worked, and she and Ethan spent long days riding fence lines that were finally his fence lines, counting cattle that were finally his cattle, and the counting they'd started as enemies, they finished as something neither one would name. You were right, Ethan told her one evening, the two of them on horseback at the north pasture where the lazy H cattle used to graze. Harmon's beeves were gone now, driven off the grass his own again. About all of it, the hay, the sale I never went to, the pride. He turned his hat in his hands. 3,000 of these acres were bleeding me dry, and I never knew it. You said sell 'em. Focus on what pays. Rebuild the men on fairness, and not on who my daddy trusted. He was quiet a moment. I've decided to do it. All of it. Your whole plan. Claire looked at him, surprised. You're selling the 3,000 acres. 2,000. Keeping the best of it. He almost smiled. A man's got to be a little stubborn, or he ain't himself. But, yes, the rest goes. And the wages get honest, and Silas trains up new hands, and I go to my own cattle sale this fall, and I stand there and watch every head sold with my own eyes. He looked out over the land. It'll be a smaller ranch, Claire. Half what my daddy built. It'll be a solvent one, she said quietly. For the first time in your life. Smaller isn't weaker, Ethan. A thing you actually understand is stronger than twice as much you don't. She gathered her reins. Your father built big and blind. You're building small and clear. That's not a lesser ranch. That's a real one. That's what I wanted to say. He struggled with it. Words had never been his tools. He worked in fences and cattle and hard, silent labor. You didn't just save it. You made it mine. For the first time. 11 years I ran this place and never owned it. You said so yourself. Now I do. He met her eyes. Every acre of it. Because of you. Something moved across Claire Whitmore's careful face, and for a moment Ethan hoped the words might come from her, if not from him. Then she looked away, out over the grass, and squared herself the way she squared a ledger. My work here's near done, she said. The re-recording's finished. The accounts are divided. The families are safe. Her voice was very even, too even, the voice of a woman totaling a column she didn't want to reach the bottom of. There's a stage from the county seat on Friday. I've booked a seat on it. The evening went silent around them. Friday, Ethan said. Friday. And Ethan Cole, master of 4,000 acres, opened his mouth to say the thing that would stop her, and heard his father's voice in his own throat. Instead, a man doesn't beg, a man doesn't bend, a man holds his ground. And the old cursed pride rose up in him. One last time, and he said nothing at all. Friday, then, was all he managed. Claire looked at him a moment longer. Then she turned her horse toward the house. "Yes," she said. "Friday." Silas found him in the barn that night, savaging a length of harness leather that hadn't done anything to deserve it. "She's leaving Friday," the old man said. It wasn't a question. "She's got a stage booked. And you told her to go." "I told her Friday then." Ethan yanked the leather. "Same thing." Silas leaned against the stall and watched him a while. "Your brother wrote her 3 letters, the old man said. "You know that. You told me. 3 letters, all worried about money, none of them to you." He paused. "You ever wonder what she wrote back?" Ethan's hands went still on the leather. "'Cause I got to thinking on it," Silas went on. "A man writes 3 letters to a woman about his troubles, she writes back. That's how letters work. And whatever she wrote, it brought her up this mountain after he died. 3 days' ride, to a family that didn't come to her wedding, to sit at the table of a man who looked at her across a grave like she'd dug it." He shook his head slowly. "You don't do that for money, Ethan. She could have sold her quarter by mail and never smelled this dust. She came because your brother mattered to her, and she stayed." He fixed the younger man with a hard old eye. "She stayed 3 weeks past the day she could have left riding fences with a stubborn fool who won't say 2 soft words in a row. Now why do you reckon she did that?" Ethan didn't answer. "I'll tell you what I know," Silas said, straightening. "I know she came up here to find out what she couldn't fix in time." Those were her words at the gate first day. What she couldn't fix in time. He put his hat on. "Well, she was too late for your brother. Fixed the whole valley instead, but too late for the one man she rode up here for. And now she's fixing to ride back down a mountain that's whole again alone, having saved everybody's home, but got none of her own." He turned for the door. "You want to be another thing she was too late for, that's your business. But I buried your daddy proud and stubborn and alone, Ethan, and I'll be damned if I'll bury you the same way and call it strength." He was at the barn door when Ethan finally spoke. "What if she says no?" Silas stopped. And when he turned back, his old face had gone gentle in a way Ethan had rarely seen. "Son," he said, "you spent 11 years terrified to ask a question because you were afraid of the answer. Show me the books. 4 words. You couldn't say 'em, and it cost you near everything." He put his hand on the doorframe. "You learned to say 'em to a thief. You telling me you can look Cole Harmon in the eye and ask for the truth, but you can't look at that woman and ask her to stay." He shook his head. "The audit ain't done, Ethan. There's one ledger left, the one in your own chest, and you're the only auditor it'll ever have. So open the damn book before that stage does it for you." Friday came the way dreaded things come too fast and all at once. Claire's trunk was packed. The wagon that would carry her down to the county seat and the waiting stage stood ready in the yard, one of the new hands holding the team. She'd said her goodbyes the day before, ridden down to each of the families, and the mountain had not let her go easy. Elias Peterson had gripped her hand and been unable to speak, and Mrs. Peterson had pressed a jar of preserves on her like it was gold, and the widow Aldridge had wept openly and called her the answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. And Mrs. Pruitt, who'd called her a crow, had stood a long time holding both her hands before she found her voice. "I was wrong about you," the old woman had said. "I was wrong about the whole shape of things. Thank you for being right when it wasn't safe to be." Now there was only the ranch left to leave. And Ethan. He was on the porch when she came out. He'd been on the porch an hour, and he'd rehearsed 100 things, and every one of them had died in his throat. "Well," Claire said. She had her ledger under her arm the way she'd carried it the day she stepped off the wagon a stranger. "Mr. Cole." The Mr. Cole landed like a slap. They'd been Ethan and Claire for 2 weeks now. She'd gone back to the formal name on purpose. He understood armor the way she'd worn it that first day at the gate. She was already leaving. She'd started leaving with the name. Claire. He said it deliberately, refusing the armor. You've got a minute before that wagon. The stage won't wait. The stage'll wait a minute for a woman who saved the county. He came down off the porch. I've got something to say, and I've been 11 years learning how to say hard things, and I'm still no good at it, so you'll have to bear with the clumsiness. Claire went still on the steps. You told me the first night, Ethan said, that there'd be a moment I'd hate you, when I'd wish the town had scared you off. It never came. I told you that. What I didn't understand then, he turned his hat in his hands, that old nervous gesture, was why. And I figured it out this week riding fences watching you get ready to go. He made himself look at her. It never came because you weren't the one auditing me, Claire. I was. You just handed me the pencil. Every leak you found, every lie, every acre. I never owned. You didn't do that to me. You did it with me. You sat in my daddy's office and you turned the light on, and then you let me be the one to look. Nobody in my whole life ever did that. Everybody either told me what to do or told me I was fine. You made me see. His voice roughened. And a man doesn't hate the person who teaches him to see. He stopped. The word was right there. And the old pride reared up one final time. His father's voice, a man doesn't bend, and Ethan Cole put it down. For good. The way he'd put down the 3,000 acres and the memory of his father and every proud blind thing that had nearly cost him his life. He loves her, Ethan said. That's the end of the sentence, Claire. A man doesn't hate the person who teaches him to see. He loves her. I love you. I've been trying to find the shape of it for 2 weeks, and that's the shape. I love you, and you've got a stage booked, and I would rather ask you to stay and hear you say no than let you ride down that mountain, never having heard me ask. He stood there, hat in his hands, more undefended than he'd been in his whole armored life. So I'm asking, don't get on that wagon. Stay, not for the ranch. It'll run fine now you saw to that. Stay for me. Stay because I'm asking, and I've never once in my life asked anybody for a thing I was afraid to lose. The yard was dead silent. Silas by the barn had gone motionless. The new hand holding the team was staring at his boots, trying to disappear. Even the wind seemed to hold. Claire Whitmore stood on the steps with her ledger under her arm, and for the first time since she'd climbed down off that wagon, a stranger Ethan watched the count fail her. Watched her open her mouth and find no total. Watched the woman who read men like columns of figures come up for once against a sum she couldn't work. You waited, she said. Her voice wasn't even anymore. It shook. You waited until Friday, until the wagon was in the yard. Ethan, I've been here 3 weeks past my leaving. I rode fences with you every day. I gave you every chance a woman can give a man without saying the words herself, and you said Friday then. A tear went down her face, and she didn't wipe it. Do you know what that did to me? I packed that trunk thinking you'd let me go. I said goodbye to 19 families thinking the 20th didn't want me. I booked that seat believing I'd read you wrong, that I'd read everyone right my whole life and gotten you wrong, and it broke my heart because you were the first man I ever wanted to have read wrong. Claire, I'm not finished. She came down a step. You want to know why I came up this mountain? I told you it was to find what I couldn't fix in time. That was true, but it wasn't the whole ledger. Her voice cracked wide open. Your brother's last letter, the one about you being stubborn as the mountain but melting in spring. Do you know how he ended it? He said, Claire, if anything happens to me, go up there. Not for the money. He'll drive you mad the first week and you'll want to leave. Don't. My brother's the best man I know, and he doesn't know it, and he's going to spend his whole life alone unless somebody stubborn enough to match him goes up that mountain and refuses to leave. She was weeping now, openly, and still she stood straight. He was matchmaking Ethan, from the grave. Your brother's dying wish was that I'd come up here and see in you what he saw, and I did. I saw it the first day at the gate when you defended a woman you meant to throw off your land. And I've been waiting 2 weeks for you to see it too, and you almost let me leave. Bamji. Ethan crossed the yard in 3 strides. Then don't leave, he said right in front of her now, close enough to see every tear. Danny sent you up here to save me. All right, he was right about that, same as he was right about the money. So finish it. Stay and finish it. I'm asking you a second time, and I'll ask you 100 times. I'm done being too proud to ask. Stay. Claire looked up at him. Say it plain, she whispered. The way I made you say every hard thing this whole time. No hiding it in pretty words. Plain. Marry me. Ethan Cole said, plain as a fence post, plain as the truth she'd taught him to say. Not stay. Marry me. Be my wife and my partner, and the woman who counts what I can't and calls me a fool when I need it. Marry me, Claire Whitmore, and let's build something small and clear and true on this mountain, the two of us, for whatever years we've got. That's the whole sum of it. That's my total. There's nothing under it and nothing hid. Marry me. And Claire Whitmore, the ledger, the ice woman, the crow the town invented so they wouldn't have to check their own arithmetic, dropped her leather ledger in the dust of the Cole ranch yard and reached up with both hands and pulled his face down to hers and gave him the only answer that had ever been true. Yes, she said against his mouth. Yes, you stubborn, blind good man. Yes. By the barn, Silas took off his hat and pressed it to his chest and looked up at the ridge where a younger Cole was buried in high country ground and said so quiet only the wind could hear it. You done it, Danny. You reached clear down from heaven and you done it. Rest now. He's not alone. She stayed. Quiet. They married that autumn in the little church in the valley, and the pew that should have held Ethan's family the first time around was full to the walls. This time, not with Coles, for there were only the 2 of them left, but with 19 families who owed her their land, and him their eyes. Elias Peterson gave her away because she had no father near, and he said it would be the honor of his life. Mrs. Pruitt, who'd called her a crow, cried harder than anyone. The widow Aldridge sang. The ranch grew smaller that year exactly as Claire had planned. 2,000 acres sold, the best kept, the wages made honest. The books kept in her hand now and open to any man who cared to look, though none did any more. For on the Cole ranch the words, "Show me the books," had become not a threat, but a welcome offered before it was ever asked. Ethan went to his cattle sale that fall and stood in the dust and watched every head sold with his own 2 eyes, and came home with a bank draft. He'd counted himself and set it in Claire's hands, and she checked his arithmetic and found it right and told him so, and he grinned like a boy. The ranch made money. For the first time in Ethan Cole's life, the ranch made honest money, and he knew to the dollar where every cent of it came from, and where every cent of it went. But that wasn't the thing. That was never the thing. The thing was a night late that first winter, the 2 of them at the desk in his father's office where it had all begun, Claire's ledger open between them and the lamp burning warm. And Ethan looked at his wife, at the woman who had ridden 3 days up a mountain for a dead man, and stayed a lifetime for a living, one who had turned the light on in every dark room of his life and then taught him to keep it lit himself, and he understood at last the whole shape of what his brother had known. Danny didn't send you up here to save the ranch, he said quietly. Claire looked up from the figures. No. Ethan reached across the desk and closed the ledger gentle, and took her ink-stained hand in his scarred one. He sent you up here to save me. The ranch was just the room big enough to do it in. He turned her hand over, looked at it. I ran 4,000 acres my whole life and never owned a one, 'cause I couldn't ask the one question that mattered. And you rode into my yard and asked it for me, and then you stayed until I learned to ask it myself. His voice was thick. I was the leak, Claire, all along. Not the hay, not the cattle, not Harmon, me. The unmeasured thing at the center of it all, and you're the only auditor who ever found me. Claire's eyes were bright in the lamplight. No, she said softly, gripping his hand. You found yourself, Ethan. I only handed you the pencil. She smiled, the whole smile now, the one she'd never once given the town that called her a crow, the one she saved for him. That was always the trade I offered, not to fix you, to let you fix yourself and love you while you did it. Ethan Cole looked at his wife across the desk, where his family's whole broken history had once been hidden, and was now kept clean and open in her steady hand, and he said the truest thing he had ever said in his life, the sum under which there was nothing hidden, and nothing left to count. "Then it's settled," he said. "Every ledger, every acre, every year I lost, and every one we've got left. You came up this mountain to find what you couldn't fix in time." He raised her hand and pressed his mouth to it. "Well, Claire Cole, you didn't just find it. You married it, and you fixed it, and you made it whole. And a man who spent his whole life too proud to be measured is telling you now with his eyes wide open and nothing hid. The only thing I ever owned worth having is the truth you rode 3 days to give me. And I will spend every summer left to me being grateful you were stubborn enough to stay." And she was. And he was. And the Cole Ranch, small and clear and honest under the mountain sun, was never again a dying empire of memory, but a living thing built on the only foundation strong enough to survive the frontier. Not pride, not tradition, not the blind loyalty that had nearly buried them all, but the plain, hard, beautiful truth between two people who had each at last been brave enough to let themselves be counted.